Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Mobility Mindset podcast. At the Mobility Mindset, we're bringing together families, medical experts, and advocates to discuss the realities of raising children with disabilities. And I am one of your hosts, Manmeet, and I am really, really excited today to introduce a special guest, Parag, to the podcast. Parag, welcome to the podcast.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Manmeet. Thank you for the invitation. Really excited to be here.
Parag is a researcher as well as the CEO of SpineX, which was derived from some of his initial research. SpineX is doing some really, really interesting and exciting work for both adults with spinal cord injury as well as children with cerebral palsy. So I think the audience will be really excited to hear more about this. Why don't we jump right in? Maybe you can tell us a bit about what SpineX is, what is this technology, and how it works.
Absolutely. SpineX is a clinical stage company that specializes in non-invasive spinal cord neuromodulation devices. Now that's a mouthful, so let me break it down. We specialize in building medical devices which are non-invasive, which means they are non-surgical in nature and are implemented on the human body without the need of a surgical intervention or needles or scalpels. And we specialize in neuromodulation, which essentially means we deliver electrical signals to different regions of the nervous system to reconnect the brain with the rest of the body and retrain how a person learns how to walk, stand, and move on their own.
Well, yeah, it's really cool stuff that you're building. One of the, I guess, simpler explanations I heard was that it's a hearing aid. It's like a hearing aid for the spine. So if I understand it, you apply the SpineX device and it will help your spinal cord and your neuromuscular system to listen and respond better. Is that fair
Exactly.
to say?
That's exactly what it is. So, when there's trauma that occurs, in most cases, the communication between the in the nervous system is lost. With our neuromodulation technology, I like to call it a hearing aid in combination with a pacemaker. So, like a pacemaker runs your heart, in our case, we are running the spinal cord, which is like the engine of the entire body, which knows how to generate movement. And because the communication is lost, we amplify the weak nerve signals, similar to what a hearing aid does to your hearing abilities, allowing the brain to hear what your rest of the body is trying to say and allowing the limbs to hear what commands the brain is sending down and what it wants you to execute. So a pacemaker with the hearing aid.
So let's take cerebral palsy as a case. So can you explain to us what happens in CP to the brain and spinal cord, and where is the connection broken?
So CP is actually a fairly unique case that you would have to consider. The trauma could occur before birth, right after birth, when there is essentially a trauma occurring in the brain due to which the communication between the brain and spinal cord is messed up. So as an engineer, you could imagine the wires, instead of coming down normally, they're now getting crossed, and the signals that are being sent down are not appropriate or are not correctly reaching the right signals. It's not that the signals are not present, they're either not reaching the right destination, or they're not sufficient, or there's too much of some of the signals. So that's really where the communication between the different centers in your brain and spinal cord and eventually your muscles are not appropriate in nature. And that over the period of time, in a typically developing child, you start to develop some of these connections between your brain and spinal cord, which is what as the child develops and grows, you start developing these connections. Due to the CP occurring very early on, a child is unable to develop the right connections or networks in the brain and spinal cord, due to which the rate of development in a CP child is lower than a typically developing child. So a combination of these two phenomena results in inability for children to execute movement, which a typically developing child would be able to.
So when a baby's born, there's a whole host of neuromuscular connections. There's neurons everywhere. If there's trauma, they might be crossed over a lot more. And as neuroplasticity happens for every child as they are learning, because of the crossover and for other reasons, that the learning might be reduced and because of the trauma. And essentially, what your device is doing is fixing that or improving that.
Yes, we are trying to realign the communication, realign the wiring to a more normal state. We're not claiming to fix it, since we don't really know if that can be done considering the extent of the trauma. But we are essentially resetting the wiring and resetting how the communication is going through between these different centers in the spinal cord, brain, and the muscle.
That's really interesting. So when the trauma happens, if this is like a highway, brain to the muscle, can there be damage in CP? Is the damage on both sides of the highway or one side predominantly? What happens?
So far, what we know is that the damage or the trauma is primarily up in the brain centers, but due to the trauma occurring there, it is still sending the wrong signals throughout the nervous system, throughout the body. So the brain is like the hub, the center. So when there's trauma that occurs there, everything downstream from that is impacted due to the trauma. So despite the wiring still being appropriate or correct below, still unable to process the right information. Having said that, the spinal cord and the rest of the nervous system is still not a highway. It itself is able to generate a lot of control on its own, which is really why our technology is able to leverage that intrinsic capability that is present. The spinal cord's function is not only to send signals from the brain to the rest of the body, but in itself process that information. What traditionally people have been calling muscle memory is actually spinal memory, because the spinal cord has the ability to learn, has the ability to change, and the ability to process information by itself independent of the brain.
Is this what the concept of central pattern generators comes from? And maybe can you describe that a bit more and some examples?
Absolutely. So yes, so central pattern generator is a phenomena which essentially describes cells in the spinal cord or networks of cells in the spinal cord that are firing on their own independent of any supraspinal or brain input, allowing a very rhythmic pattern to be generated in the flexor and extensor muscles, which are traditionally antagonistic muscles or that are firing in opposite patterns. So when this CPG or central pattern generator is activated, essentially can drive a particular joint or can drive a group of muscles in a very rhythmic pattern continuously, and will be always on as long as the external trigger is present. And that trigger could be a combination of sensory input from a treadmill belt or an electrical stimulation or a pharmacological input. And that's really the concept of CPG, which is what we're tapping into with our technology.
And I guess, like, for example, the heartbeats is a central pattern generator. The brain doesn't have to direct the heart to beat rhythmically. And if you have spinal cord injury, your heart will continue to beat. And from my understanding, so is walking essentially. But why are people with spinal cord injury unable to walk if it is a central pattern generator just like heartbeat?
That's a very interesting point you make, Manmeet. And I think while we have a very good understanding of what the central pattern generator is, what's still not fully understood is how can we tap into that intrinsic network and maximize its capability. One of the reasons why a person is unable to even stand, and I'll extend this out to a use case which is not something that you normally consider, but one of the reasons why an astronaut cannot stand in space is because they don't, what you would consider is there's no gravity. The reality is that the gravity is just the trigger. The actual reason they're unable to stand on their own is because they're unable to process that sensory information from the base of the foot. Because there's no ground reaction force being generated due to lack of gravity. So now when you extend that out back to a person living with paralysis due to a spinal cord injury, they're unable to process that sensory information being generated from the base of the foot, which novel developing young adults as well as other individuals would be able to process in their brain and spinal cord. And due to the trauma occurring in the spinal cord, that sensory information is now limited to just below the level of injury and is unable to reach the highest centers. So why can't an individual with a spinal cord injury stand or walk on their own? One of the key reasons is that information is now limited and unable to get to the higher centers, and the nerves in the spinal cord below the level of injury are dormant.
Very interesting. Okay, so I'm going to keep summarizing here just so that I can keep up. What you're saying is, so walking is a process default generated by central pattern generators from the spinal cord. And we also know this for a fact at Trexo, but and it's just for some context for the audience. Like there was this age-old experiment. I think it was a cat or some animal where they severed the connection between the brain and the spinal cord, and they put the cat on the treadmill, and the cat continued to walk. So we know for a fact that walking signals come from the spinal cord. And so even if there is damage to some parts of the brain or the motor cortex, you might still be able to walk. But what you're explaining is it's not just that. What really matters is the stimulus and the situation that you're in, the inputs that your body is receiving, and all of those. For example, you said the right contact, and there I think there's a list of other factors. What are some of the other factors?
It's the posture that you're present in. You know, how is your body? Where's the ground reaction force? Are you in a position where you can actually take a step? Is the momentum present? Is there a treadmill belt under you that is allowing you to drive the movement? So there are multiple factors that determine whether walking as a concept or whether walking as an end result can actually be executed by the individual and by the nervous system in return.
And so essentially the providing the right stimulus is very important. And how does the SpineX device, let's say we have the right stimulus and we're walking, um, and just a side tangent, like in a Trexo, for example, we often stress the importance for this reason, like importance of posture. And I think what you're explaining is if you're just slouched forward and if your head is really slouched forward, your body will not think that it's in a standing or walking state.
Right.
And if you're not having kind of the heel strike and toe off, you're not the weight shifting, your body's not really learning to fire those triggers. Is this also similar to the concept of I'm not sure if you read this book, The Boy Who Could Run But Not Walk? Why is it that, some kids with CP and also we've seen this in the trek, so like if you're walking slow,
Yes.
it gets hard, but as soon as you speed up, or let's say some kids will start running and then the tone goes away, everything just becomes smooth. Why does that happen?
Again, great question. Anyone's really narrowed down as to what the reasons exactly are, but my interpretation of this is there are different networks within the spinal cord that are responsible for different activities. And some of the early research we did at UCLA, where we studied rodents or rats that had a spinal cord injury, complete transection, and when we had them walk forward versus when we had them walk backwards, there were different regions in the spinal cord that were activated. Even though the muscle groups were the same, the movement was similar, which is walking, but because the direction of movement is different, different neurons in the spinal cord are now activated, which tells us that there are different networks that are present. There's some level of overlap that exists, but there are distinct sets of neurons that are controlling each of these. So going back to your question, why could certain activities such as walking or running be performed versus not the others? My interpretation is that there are probably certain neurons that are responsible for certain activities that are able to be activated, and due to the cerebral palsy condition, the signal is reaching those neurons and the motor function can be executed, whereas in other cases the signal is not reaching those neurons, or even if it is reaching it, it's incorrect, because of which the motor function cannot be eventually executed successfully.
So same muscle groups might fire completely different neural pathways
Exactly.
depending on the activity. Very interesting. And so within this context, how is the SpineX device acting as a hearing aid or pacemaker?
One of the key objectives for us is not to drive the movement. So if you take a muscle stimulator, for example, which has been available for 20, 30, 40 years now, the manner in which it operates is when you deliver an impulse or a stimuli, you get a muscle contraction. In our case, we always maintain the intensity of the neuromodulation at a sub-motor threshold. So we're not actually trying to induce a muscle contraction or a movement to occur. We only want to excite the nervous system to a point where it is now in a more responsive state, and it is more responsive to the proprioceptive or sensory information from the periphery and the descending signals from the brain. So when you get these three together, neuromodulation, proprioceptive information, and the descending commands from the brain, the nervous system is in a more functional state and is able to respond to the cues given to it, which is standing or walking or what have you. So our objective is to essentially amplify the signals present and get the nervous system to a more excited state, so it is more responsive to the cues being received.
Wow. So essentially what you're saying is like a muscle stim or e-stim will send like a zap or like a sharp zap, which will be which will be really loud, and it will basically cause the muscle to contract, fire a big signal down the chain. Instead, what you're doing is just sending a low noise, like a buzz, which is just this vibration is essentially, or this noise essentially causing the whole nervous system to be more awake, or at least those regions to be more awake, turned on. And based on your research, it responds better at that point to external stimuli.
Exactly. So you can describe it as like, you have a bucket of water, and but due to the trauma, the level of water is really low. We want to raise that level in the bucket, and that's what neuromodulation doing. We're raising the level
Got
to a
it.
point where now even a little shake from an external stimuli, let's say the signal from the brain, which is a way to shake the bucket, you're going to have a spillover or water spilling out of the bucket, which is the motor output. If that bucket was only half full, even if you shake it vigorously, water may not spill out. So that's how we operate. Raise the level of excitability so that even with a little signal, it is now more responsive.
That's really exciting stuff because, and I believe you also achieved breakthrough status with FDA, but we'll come to that. But maybe we can start with, or maybe we can switch gears a little bit to like your background and how you got started in this research.
I've been in healthcare, I would say, my entire life. My family was heavily involved in pharmaceuticals growing up, so I spent quite a bit of time in that space and understanding some of the nuances of healthcare at a very early stage. But I always uh, thought like an engineer. So biomedical engineering ended up being a good culmination of these two technologies in these two areas for me. So I did my graduation, master's and PhD in biomedical engineering, specializing in neuroengineering and neurorehabilitation. So I'm coming up on about 17 years in this field as a professional. So pretty much spent my entire career developing technologies that we are now commercializing here at SpineX. I ended up joining this field with working with my mentor, Dr. Reggie Edgerton, very serendipitous manner, and just things came together, and I am where I am today due to a lot of things just falling in place.
And then, so you did your biomedical, and then your research it started out at UCLA, right?
That's correct. Yeah. Spent my master's and PhD at UCLA between 2008 and 2013. So I spent about 5 years doing my research, and then honestly did not find anything better to do other than continuing the research. So spent another 6 years as a full-time research scientist at UCLA under Dr. Reggie Edgerton. And then towards the end of 2018, early 2019 is when we incorporated SpineX to bring this technology to the people that need it the most.
That's awesome. And so in terms of the device, like we spoke a little bit about central pattern generators, and it's exciting because yeah, although the highway might be damaged, but there's still control from the spinal cord, which is functional. And if you add on top the stimulation from a device like SpineX, that can really speed up the learning. Will the SpineX essentially only help with tasks related to central pattern generators, or tasks that are coming from the spine, or it will also strengthen signals coming from the brain?
It will also, strengthen signals coming from the brain in an indirect manner. So that's not the primary objective. When you consider motor function as a target, we know that there's direct, neural connections between the spinal cord and certain muscles. But based on what we have seen so far in clinical trials that we have conducted ourselves, as well as other collaborators, there's a direct impact on other systems within the body which are directly or indirectly impacted by the trauma, such as autonomic functions, cardiovascular functions, bladder, bowel, sexual functions, spasticity, breathing, all of which may or may not innervate or be connected by the spinal cord. But due to the fact that the entire nervous system is operating as one system in unison, we do have a positive impact on each of these organ systems with our technology. So for an individual that has a spinal cord injury, and it's interesting to note that SCI is the most traumatic condition that impacts every single organ system downstream from the injury. They suffer from multiple organ system failures or dysfunctions. We are able to have a positive impact on each and every organ system when the device is on, and due to neuroplasticity after the device has been turned off as well.
Wow. Yeah, so let's maybe go into that. Like what are some of the early results look like?
Well, the exciting result for us is really how this can impact things like bladder and bowel function, which are one of the highest priorities for someone living with paralysis now. For someone that a healthy individual, you would consider your bladder, you just take your bladder for granted. Now, that is an issue. You would really appreciate it only when you have an issue with your bladder. For a person living with a spinal cord injury, they often suffer from loss of sensation of how full your bladder is, inability to urinate, loss of bladder capacity, urgency, frequency, and incontinence. These are some of the most common symptoms that these individuals deal with. And unfortunately, the current standard of care doesn't really address these conditions. They're only managing the symptoms. With our technology, we're able to have a direct impact, allowing them to regain control of their bladder, have greater bladder capacity, regain sensation so they know how full their bladder is, reduce the number of urination cycles, especially at night, so they can sleep through the night, as well as reduce the number of incontinence episodes. So that's having a huge impact on the quality of life of the individual, their loved ones, as well as giving them the ability to go back to work and have a more normal life along with their family members. That's been some of the more exciting results in the past few years, which is the basis for our breakthrough designation with the US FDA, as well as the basis for our global pivotal trial that we recently completed.
That is amazing because you have a device that is actually targeting the root cause as opposed to more superficial levels, which is really unique. And what about trials with kids with CP?
So what we have essentially developed is a platform technology, and because of its non-invasive nature, we're able to adapt the neuromodulation sites to different regions of the spine based on what the individual needs. So one of the applications that we have spent quite a bit of time and are really excited by some of the early results is being able to have an impact on children living with cerebral palsy. And so far, we have worked with close to 50 children living with CP, ranging from children as young as 2 years of age to children as old as 16, as well as some adults as old as 60 years of age living with cerebral palsy. And what we've noticed and what we've demonstrated so far is within one session, we're able to have a direct impact on their ability to control different muscle groups, control their limbs, control their hands, and be able to sit on their own, stand on their own, as well as take steps on their own.
Wow. So you essentially attach it at different sites, let's say the legs, the spinal cord, and you turn it on. And within that session itself, you see changes?
Exactly.
Wow.
The turnaround time on this, if I may call it, is almost instantaneous, unlike a drug which takes several doses before you start to see an effect. So the impact our technology can have on children with CP is instantaneous.
Wow. And things like your posture or head control, are these also controlled by central pattern generators? So turning this on is just making the response and opening up the bandwidth?
Exactly. So all of these are controlled by different regions of the spine. So there are
Right.
neurons in the neck, for example, that are directly controlling your posture and your trunk muscles. There are neurons in your lower back that are controlling your lower extremity muscles. So we're able to target each of these centers so that based on what the child needs, deliver the appropriate stimuli so they can start to learn how to use those muscles.
Wow, that's very exciting. So I guess these are some early trials. Are you doing a bigger study right now?
That's in the works. That's something that we're working towards right now. We do plan to launch a larger global pivotal trial later this year. And the objective is to eventually get this approved by the US FDA and other jurisdictions so that this technology can be made available to the children around the world that need it. Considering they have almost no technology that addresses them other than the Trexo.
All right, how do I buy one? When do you launch?
That's a great question. We are working towards that. We are still pre FDA approval, so it's still not on the market officially. All our studies are limited to just investigational clinical trials, and a lot of that information is available on resources such as clinicaltrials.gov. So if someone's interested, they can definitely reach out to some of the trial sites and identify and understand if they are a good fit or not. Our technology, we're expecting it to be on the market in the next 12 to 18 months. So we definitely will share more information as and when we get closer to a launch.
Awesome. Yeah, so guys, if you want to go to clinicaltrials.gov, search for SpineX and see if there's sites still recruiting in your area, you could actually get to try out the SpineX device, which is very, very cool. And how do you see the Trexo and SpineX fitting together in the continuum of care?
I see them as two technologies that are really addressing the same root cause and have a lot of overlap in terms of how they address and assist the individual. So there's a lot of synergy that exists between these two technologies. There's no two better technologies that I think that can come together to eventually address the unmet clinical need that these children are living with. I've always believed that a single technology is never going to be the solution that everyone needs, and every child is different and they're going to have different needs. So there is a need to develop multiple technologies, and a combination or a combinatorial approach is really what is going to be the ultimate solution that is going to work for a majority of kids. So between the Trexo and the SpineX, I see a perfect marriage in some sense, where I see them coming together and really having a global impact where the combined impact is greater than the sum of the two together.
Yeah, and it's an interesting way you put it earlier, which was the SpineX is essentially turning on or adding the water to the bucket, but you still need the stimulus and the movements and to kind of the input to turn on the central pattern generators. So essentially that's where the Trexo can come in to give you the posture, the movement, the heel strike toe off, so that it creates the environment for the repetitive motion and the firings to really happen. I've connected with you a while ago and been really excited by the technology, and obviously our dream would be to have the Trexo and SpineX be working together. That would be really, really cool. And I think we have done some trials, or there's also a trial happening, which is using a Trexo and a SpineX together.
I think there are definitely more than two smart people that are out there, and someone's already figured it out. So yeah, there are trials happening at the academic level that are putting these two together. But I think that idea definitely needs to be further developed, and everyone needs to come together to really see how these two can complement each other.
Yeah, and some of the early results are very, very exciting actually
Okay.
from that trial. So I'm really looking forward to the results to come out. It's gonna be amazing. Awesome. How do you see SpineX and kind of the mobility mindset, which is kind of the overarching theme of our podcast? What do you see as, what is in your terms the mobility mindset, and what is the importance of mobility?
That's a deep one. That's a big one. I think mobility really defines human nature. Mobility really defines who we are as an organism compared to some of our previous generations. And when you look at evolution, one of the biggest changes that occurred in in the organism as they evolved was the ability to ambulate, the ability to move, the ability to start using your hands for activities. So I think mobility is really central to anything that you do and potentially central to our existence. So I think that really sums up how I would view and what in my view mobility really stands for.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Parag. Anything else you would like to say in closing?
I think Manmeet and team have done a fantastic job in terms of developing their technology, Strexo, and the impact that they're having on the children with CP and other pediatric population. I wish them the best of luck, and this platform that they've generated, they've developed mobility mindset. I think it's a great way to further enhance the impact they're having in other ways. So, I congratulate them on this platform, and continuing to and look forward to continuing this conversation in other ways.
Thank you, Parag. Our part of the goal with the podcast is to bring together the smartest people, and help build the community more in whatever small way we can, whether it's connecting families with other families or connecting families with some experts and key opinion leaders like yourself. So yeah, there's going to be a lot more. We have a pretty exciting lineup for the rest of the year as well, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So thank you so much, Parag, for joining us on today's episode.
Thank you for having me.